Let me show you how to be amazing in the networking room so you never have to go back to one. There is no natural skill that can't be beaten by systems, process, practice, and preparation. If you are reading 100 books but applying none, then stop reading books.
Hi everyone, it's me, Anna. I'm here with Michal today, and that means it's the next episode of Operation Automation. And today we have a very special guest joining us, a best-selling author, Matthew Pollard, who specializes on a topic that's a little bit too close for both of us here. Matthew is going to talk about introverts, extroverts, whoever has it best, and what helps you in networking. But before we do just that, Michal, I have a question for you. On this big spectrum, introverts versus extroverts, where do you think you fall?
I think I'm somewhere in between. It might feel, quite often, it might feel like I'm more of an extrovert. I do like being around people. I do like going, to house parties and stuff like that. But at the same time, like Friday evenings and that kind of stuff, I usually spend it at home. I like to have it, in my own cozy, let's say, environment. And I think after so many meetings, so many webinars that we do, I just need that space to just regenerate and keep myself, in a quiet zone. How about you?
All right, you do webinars. That's very extroverted. I think too, I think I've fallen a little bit more towards the introverted space, but I've kind of coached myself to be extroverted when needed. I have a lot of situations where I feel very uncomfortable inside, but people would never tell it, and they would be like, no, you don't look shy, and I'm dying inside from the desire to just go and hide under some rock, especially at events.
I have to agree that you don't seem, or you don't come off as an introvert, at least, to the point that I know you.
I mean, here I am doing a podcast. It's pretty extroverted.
That's true. And you just mentioned conferences, right? I feel really bad at conferences, really awkward. I'm okay to reach out to people online. I'm happy to do it on LinkedIn, just comment on stuff or DM them. But at the conference, even if I sort of know someone or seen them before, it feels odd. It's like, it's the disco party kind of style when you just want to say hi to someone, but it feels just awkward to me.
No, you see, I'm the opposite here, because if I've talked to the person at least once, I can force myself to communicate to them again. I can be very charming. I can come up to people, because in the live setting, you sort of has this benefit of a doubt whether the person hasn't noticed you or hasn't heard you. So you also have an opportunity to pretend that you were not completely brushed off. And online, everything is recorded. So you've sent a reply, you did not get anything back. That means you've been ghosted. And we know that ghosting is not good. So I think this is going to be an interesting episode, because Matthew definitely knows about introverts versus extroverts a lot more than we do. And let's find out what he has to share. Hi there, Matthew. Thank you so much for joining us today for this beautiful episode of Operation Automation. How are you today?
I'm doing terrific. Thank you so much for having me on.
It's great to have you on. Thank you for agreeing to this. And before we start talking about your latest book, I have a special question to all of our guests. Which is the one thing in life you wish you could automate?
Good question. I think if I was going to say, I would love to automate a process where there was an AI system that actually looked at my schedule and said, you know what, that's not a priority. We can move that. That is a priority. Let's make sure. And it's going to take extra time than what I think. I think one of the issues that a lot of people have in life is really understanding what their priorities are. And especially with automation these days, a lot of things end up in your schedule that don't need to be there. And a lot of times it's because you don't set the rule sets correctly that you need to when you go about setting that automation. So I think for me, especially because I set up a lot of my automation when I first started my business, that going back and reassessing that and then looking at the level of AI and the level of intelligence there is now associated with making smarter decisions on your behalf, I think that's what I would love.
That sounds amazing. And I think I have a solution for you, because that's what my TikTok feed has been dedicated to for the past 2 or 3 months. Apparently there is an app called Motion, which does just that.
Wow. Okay. Well, it looks like that'll be what I'm doing right after the interview then.
What you said is like, it relates to actually, being able to say no. And I was actually wondering, is like, how difficult it is. Like, have you learned already to say no in certain situations, or maybe you have some, tips for maybe, like introverts or not exactly introverts, like how to actually learn to say no to certain things?
Absolutely. Well, that's an interesting question. And yes, introversion definitely plays into it. But I think that the first thing is to look at the reasons why, especially as we become more successful in business, we say no. Because, or why we can't say no is probably a better way to frame it. I think the biggest hurdle that we have is that when we first start our business, we want to say yes to everything. Like we go to a networking event and somebody says, do you want to go to this networking event? Absolutely. Do you want to do this? Absolutely. And we have to learn to say yes to everything. And then all of a sudden we get to this point, and I'm not even going to say totally busy. Like a lot of people start to even consider this when they get to totally busy, but that's already a problem because we're struggling to deliver to our clients. We're now, because we're struggling to deliver to our clients, we're no longer marketing. We're not setting up the automations we need. Like if we're operating at 100% capacity, we have a real problem. So realistically, what we need to do is learn to say no much sooner. But there is this tipping point. And one of the things, and this comes down to goal setting a lot of times, unfortunately, goal setting has been talked about way too often, but everybody talks about these grand audacious goals. And I'm all for grand audacious goals. Like the number of people that come to me in October and their goal is, I want to make $1 million by the end of the year. And I'm like, how much have you made up till October? And they're like, 12,000, but I know I can do it. And the problem is that they don't set themselves a opportunity to put their head up and say, well, what do I actually want to achieve now? And what do I want to achieve now? I worked with a ghostwriter that I took from, he literally made 27,000 by October of the year. He did have $1 million cut target, of course. But I said, look, firstly, I don't understand how you'd spend $1 million right now because, that's not even in your mind, right? It's just this goal that makes you feel better about the situation that you're in. So what I want to ask you is, I'm not saying like I want you to live on champagne and caviar, but I also want you to set a goal that's not living on bread and gruel either, right? Like let's come up with something that makes sense. And the number was 56,000. We managed to get him to hit that within 6 weeks. He actually hit 120 by the end of the year. But what was interesting is at that time, he got an opportunity to sit back, put his head up and say, am I willing to trade off as much for the next amount of money? Am I willing to trade off as much for the next? So at every single step, he got the opportunity to look up and say, is there a smarter way for me to make money now? Is there, am I willing to trade off as much of my time with my family? Am I willing to do this? Am I willing to do that? And what is a smarter way to make money now? So I think our ability to say no a lot of times extends to, are we making the smartest goals? And are our goals still congruent with who we are and what phase we are in our business? So I think that if we set goals that are more appropriate, and I don't suggest not saying I'm not going to hit $1 million because I'd like to see more businesses do that. And by the way, not revenue, profit. I'd love to see you make $1 million in profit because everyone charges after this $1 million in revenue and they make no money. But the thing I will say is once you set that goal, you want to set micro goals on the way to it so you can put your head up. And that allows you to say no. Because I always find when I start to get anxious, it's usually because I'm moving away from my micro goal, which may still be heading towards my larger goal. But a lot of times there are smarter ways, or I'm no longer in as much as I was because for me, I just feel like I'm working too hard. So by setting these micro goals, it allows me to reassess whether or not I'm saying yes to the right things, saying no to the right things. And then on that note, when it comes to introversion, it's really important for an introvert to learn how to say no because everybody comes to us with urgent things. It's a staff member that's got this urgent thing that we need to talk about right now because they've been putting it off for 3 weeks, but now it's urgent for us today, even though we've got a deadline tomorrow. So as an introvert, we have to learn to plan and prepare, which I believe introverts are amazing at. First, we can also leverage our ability to empathize. Oh, Anna, I'm so sorry that you look so stressed about this situation. I really want to help you with this. I really do. One of my biggest concerns, though, is that you're coming to me with this now, but it seems like this could have been addressed 3 weeks ago. Let's sit down and have a dialogue about that first. Right? So Anna now knows, oh my gosh, I can't come to Matt with a problem within 12 hours notice because he's going to sit me down and talk about how I can plan this more effectively next time. So I'm going to prioritize Matt and then all the other people, I'll run to them 12 hours before. And maybe it's a skill set they'll learn because of that. So learning how to say no is a lot about learning how to handle urgent problems that come to us and learning how to prioritize based on what's actually important to us. Too many people run at goals that they inherited from their mother, their father, their drunk roommate they had in college that said that was important, without actually thinking, is this actually important to me? And is it still important to me today?
Yeah, thank you. Definitely.
I really like it, this edge of working smarter, not harder. I mean, this is something, especially in marketing, we all appreciate a lot, as well as the 80-20% rule. And it's great that you're talking about it in the context of introvertism, which brings us to the most important part of this discussion, I suppose. Your book, The Introvert's Edge. Could you tell us a little bit more about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it really came to a point of necessity for me, because what happened, I mean, my backstory is I had a reading speed of a sixth grader in late high school. I was super introverted. I should be the last person teaching anybody sales, by the way, or teaching people how to network. Like any so-called extroverted arena, and I say so-called because the thesis of my book is that I actually believe that introverts are the best networkers, the best salespeople. And by the way, I'm not just guessing. There is science that backs this up. I mean, Zig Ziglar, the most well-known sales trainer in the world, is an introvert. Ivan Meisner, the most well-known, he runs the largest networking group in the world. He's an introvert. Small talk, we think we can't do that. David Letterman, Oprah Winfrey, both introverts. So I'm not just guessing, but yet there's this, it's like this world consensus that introverts are terrible at sales. They don't have gift of gab. They're terrible at networking. And what happened was I fell into sales because I lost my job just before Christmas. And, I took a gap year to find myself because I had so much struggle at school. I took a job at a real estate agency, and before you think I was selling, I was the guy in the back office doing data entry with a look on my face like, don't speak to me, I'm here to find myself. 3 weeks in, lose my job. It's just before Christmas in Australia. I know you guys are in Poland, and a lot of people that hear me speak are in the US. So this is going to seem weird, but Australia has summer and Christmas at the same time, right? Our seasons are back to front. So everyone's about to go away on holidays on the 20th of December and not come back till the 15th or 20th of January. So, my dad broke his back 80 hours a week supporting the family. The deal for me to take the year off to find myself was really to, support myself. That was what I had to do. Yet here I am out of work. So I pull out the classifieds, and there are only 3 jobs listed, and they're all commission-only sales roles. For me, an introvert that struggled to talk to my own friends, that had grown up feeling like the slow kid, horrible acne, braces, this was not the ideal profession for me. It just was my only shot. So I applied for all 3 jobs, and shortly after, I got 3 interviews. And then I got 3 job offers, and I'm like, maybe they see something in me I don't see in myself. So I accept one doing business-to-business telecommunications sales, and I go in with a little bit of confidence because I've been offered 3 jobs. And my manager and trainer at that time says, Matt, don't get ahead of yourself. We just hire everybody. We've got this saying, we just throw mud up against the wall and we see what sticks, which is a fun saying until you realize you're the mud, right? So here I am, starting this job. I get 5 days product training and not a single second of sales training. I get thrown on this road called Sydney Road in Melbourne, Australia, and I get told to just go and sell. And I'm like, well, hang on a second. I don't even know what I'm going to say. So I take this deep breath. I walk in, and I know it doesn't sound like it, but I was lucky because I was politely told to leave. Because shortly after that, I was less politely told to leave. I was sworn at. My favorite was always getting told to get a real job. This was the only job I could get. But this happened door after door after door until my 93rd door where I made my first sale. And I remember I made about $70 and I was ecstatic for, let's call it 45 seconds. Until I had my next realization for the day. I've got to do this again tomorrow and the next day and the next. And I'm like, this is not okay. I can't just continue to do it like this. Now, usually that leads, and I think a lot of people, especially in the world of digital marketing, the number one thing, to go back to your question, what can we automate? The sales process, right? Because everybody wants to avoid the sales process. Now, I had Ryan Dice on my podcast, The Introvert's Edge, and I'm like, can we really do that? And he's like, absolutely. Eventually, right? We've got to understand what to say to our customers to get them to buy. And there's no better way than to do that than a 2-way dialogue. But for me, I had to learn the process of selling right there and then. And 18 of the people in my 20 training group quit. 2 stayed. I was one that decided to do it a different way. The other guy did what you would consider a lot of people in small business do. They're just going to grind it out or hope that they're luckier tomorrow. But I decided sales had to be a learnable system. Otherwise, my year was going to be terrible. Now, I couldn't read. I had a reading speed of a 6th grader. So picking up a Brian Tracy or a Zig Ziglar book was going to be impossible. But I typed in sales system into YouTube and all these videos came out. And literally every day I'd spend 8 hours in the field practicing what I'd learned, come home and I'd spend 8 hours learning the next step or perfecting the one that I was focused on. 16 hours a day on the weekends. I'm sure this isn't sounding fun to anyone, but things changed quickly, right? Literally, it went from 93 doors to 71 to 41 to 36 to 21, down to 18, down to 9, down to 3. I got it down to closing a sale on average every 3 doors. And about 6 weeks in, my manager pulls me aside and he's like, Matt, look, I thought I was in trouble. I mean, he just had this weird look on his face. And he's just like, Matt, we just got our national sales figures. And it turns out you're the number one salesperson in the company. Now, this was the largest sales and marketing company in the Southern Hemisphere. They employed thousands of salespeople. And I'd gone from literally having no business being in sales to the number one in the company. Well, what happened was they went, well, naturally you can sell. Obviously you can manage. So they gave me a sales team and I was like, I've got no idea. And they're like, don't worry, mud up against the wall. See what sticks. Everybody quit. Back to YouTube to learn how to manage. I got promoted 7 times in the space of a year. Fast forward just shy of a decade, I'd been responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar success stories. Now, when I moved to the US, I went, you know what? I'm going to teach other people how I do what I do because, you know, I've created all these really successful businesses by understanding that you need to differentiate, which, by the way, if you're sending out emails doing any automation and you're not differentiated, good luck. You're not going to break through the noise. You need to niche down because if you're speaking to everyone, you're speaking to no one. And then thirdly, you know, you need to create a sales system that works. Otherwise, you're just going to have all these conversations that are going to lead to, well, can you give me a discount or fighting on price, or it's just going to be horrible. So I started teaching people these 3 concepts. And people kept coming up to me because I shared my personal story just before I went into talking about sales and networking and that introverts could do it well. And all they needed was a system. And people kept coming up to me and saying, Matt, I really appreciated your presentation, but I had no idea that I could sell as an introvert. I had no idea I could network. I've been avoiding those things. And, you know, it's not in my best interest. I run my own business. And so I kept saying, somebody needs to write a book on introverted sales. Somebody needs to write a book on introverted networking, i.e. not me, because I didn't want to do it. Well, a ghostwriter that I'd taken from charging $20,000 for a ghostwritten book to $130,000 a ghostwritten book and being book solid said, Matt, you've got to put these ideas into a book. And that's what led to the Introvert's Edge series. It was really me saying, I'm tired of people feeling like introverts are second-class citizens. I think we're the best sellers, the best networkers. Our path to success is just different to that of an extrovert. And if we keep trying to become extroverted, that's our ticket to feeling inauthentic, incongruent, which is why we just don't like doing it. So my goal through all of my work is to help introverts realize, whether they use my systems or not, that all they need to do is realize that they can and discover a system that works for them, and that we can't follow extroverts, because unfortunately, while there's tons of introverted trainers out there that teach sales, that teach networking, they don't put them on their books, but it's easy to discover. What we just need to do is follow a systematic process that leverages our natural strengths as opposed to the things that really don't come naturally to us.
I think this is amazing. And I also think this is so great that you're kind of giving introverts this power, because I kind of hit every single checkbox of what you said an introvert is. And I have this little theory of my own that basically life is much easier for extroverts because you surround yourself with people. And once you're surrounded with people, you know whom to ask for favors, you know whom to talk to in terms of you need something. And you basically have much greater support system, both in personal life and in business.
Well, I'm not sure. So, I mean, the thing I will tell you is, I mean, studies highlight that extroverts definitely have a broader network than we do as introverts, but they don't have a deeper network. And what I mean by that is extroverts are known to have lots of these shallow relationships, where introverts are known to have few very deep relationships. So I know if I pick up the phone and call someone that I have a relationship with, they're much more likely to help me, offer me advice, and if I was to launch a book, they're much more likely to support me. If I'm launching a new business, they're more likely to. If I'm asking for endorsements for my book, they're much more likely to do that as well. So a lot of times we determine success by, let's imagine an extrovert going into a networking room. Do you want to buy from me? No. What about you? What about you? What about you? Right? We think that is successful because they've had lots of conversations where we might have only spoken to 3 people. Now, the way we have those conversations, unfortunately, leads to some really shallow conversations as well. Like, people ask us what we do, and you know, Anna, you might, after 20 minutes of talking about yourself, ask me what I do, and I might say something like, "Oh, my day job is that I do this." Well, that's not a great way to talk about yourself. And introverts hate to be I. So we have to learn to talk about passion and mission in a unique way. And introverts tend to struggle to communicate that. Now, extroverts don't either, but they tend to lend themselves to very transactional conversations and very shallow conversations. So studies highlight that introverts have very deep relationships. Our problem is that we struggle to create lots of them. Now, what I've discovered is, and in my work, The Introvert's Edge to Networking, I talk about the fact that if you get a clear message, you learn how to articulate your passion, mission, and driving why. So that instead of when somebody asks you what you do, you say, I do this for this group of people, even if they have this common objection, which is horrific for the average introvert. It sounds so promotional and salesy. We start talking about, I love to see this and I hate to see this and I'm on a mission to do this. All of a sudden that's infectious and people are, oh my gosh, I enjoy talking to this person. And they're not about themselves, they're about this change they want to see in the world. And because of that, we can have much more authentic conversations. So if we can learn to create system and process and structure around that initial part of the conversation, we are so lucky in the fact that not only can we have very deep relationships, we can have lots of them. It's really interesting that people say that, our thesis is that extroverts have got an advantage. They've got lots of people that they will call on to ask for favors that potentially don't want to do them favors, but sometimes feel pushed into it or sometimes feel obligated to. When we ask for favors or when we reach out to people, more often than not, people want to help us. They believe in us. They see us as real individuals, not just somebody calling them to have that surface level conversation to get a deal. The problem is we don't have enough of them. So once we learn how to systemize that, and we had a laugh about this before when we spoke about this in our prior conversation. My whole book on networking is kind of like a Trojan horse. It's let me show you how to be amazing in the networking room so you never have to go back to one. Because once you've got your message right, you understand your niche, you know how to tell and articulate your stories, you can use technology with the benefit of psychology and strategy that you've created for networking to get your ideal clients to chase you, to reach out to ideal influencers, to ideal networking partners, or what I call momentum partners and champions, and foster much deeper relationships with them. So it's very similar to saying in school, if I'm an accountant, that person's naturally better at numbers than I am. Or in Michael Jordan's case, that person's better at basketball than I am. But through systems and process, there is no natural skill that can't be beaten by systems, process, practice, and preparation.
Amen to that. I love that. I was also thinking, because I agree with everything you said. I was also kind of having this thesis of my own that introverts are quality over quantity. That's what I tell myself to fall asleep at night after I know a lot of my friends go to party I wasn't invited to. So what you're saying is you can have both quality and quantity, right?
What I'm saying is everybody should aspire to that. And I know I've been talking about how introverts have the advantage. The reason why introverts have the advantage is they're more likely to follow process and system. I'm not saying that extroverts can't. I'm saying that their natural skill of winging things gives them an advantage that's hard to give up. And what I mean by that is, there are people like good friends of mine, like Jeffrey Gittamore, who's an amazing sales trainer. He's an extrovert, but he's taken a small back step to catapult forward to learn sales systems. Like, it's actually really hard for an extrovert to teach a sales team because how do you teach people? It's easy. You just do this. How do you teach that? Right? So the thing you've got to understand is that in all processes, in every outcome we're trying to get, we do have an advantage by being introverted because we're willing to do that effort. Now, what I will say, because let's face it, without that, we're terrible at networking, we're terrible at sales. Now, an extrovert, because I don't want to seem like I'm extrovert bashing, the truth is an extrovert can learn a system and a process. They're just less likely to, and they're also more likely to go back to their winging it process because it's just not as much effort, especially in that initial period. Now, the other thing is there are studies that suggest that these things that introverts have as natural abilities, which if you don't think that empathy, active listening, the ability to reflect are superpowers when it comes to sales, networking, digital marketing, you're kidding yourself. The problem is this little initial bit that we think that we struggle with, which is why we hide behind our computers, we hide behind email, even though we know we should be driving people to our email list and getting them onto a phone call instead of driving them to a webinar first to make sure that we know what they need to hear to buy. We try to do it all at once because we're trying to hide away from having these dialogues that we need to have. Now, on the other side, extroverts have the problem with active listening. They have the problem with empathizing. And the thing with that is that's a learnable skill also. You can take the time to, and the studies say that it comes with coaching, but you can learn to empathize. You can learn to actively listen. And a lot of times in corporations, which blows my mind, they go, oh, that person, isn't listening. We'll send them to do executive coaching to learn how to listen to their staff or to empathize more. Oh, but poor Anna, she's an introvert. She just can't sell. Or she can't lead. We'll just cut her out of that. And the thing that kills me is that I see so many introverts that say, I'm an introvert and therefore I'm going to survive in my small business, not excel. Or I have to automate everything. They're looking for that exact thing. I'm gonna run ads to an email list or an opt-in. I'm going to run a webinar. It's going to lead to this perfectly presented product, and I'm never going to have to speak to anyone. Now, don't get me wrong. That's the ideal long-term place to be. But short-term, right, you want to do one thing at a time. Like if you've got 27 pieces and you're not sure which thing's not delivering, it could be the message at the very beginning that's sharing the wrong promise because it's not connected to the webinar or the email follow-up system doesn't have a congruent message and all of it's exploding. When you're learning, which one of the things I'll say, because I shared this before, GetResponse is where I learned. When you're learning, the last thing you want to do is have more than one variable. Once you've got that working, introduce a second variable, then introduce a third variable. What introverts do when it comes to digital marketing is they try to do it all, and that's always going, imagine if you were trying to learn all the different ways of swimming all at once. You're going to drown.
Could you maybe bring some more specific examples as to the variables that you could be introducing this way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it might be helpful to really kind of look at messaging first, because one of the things that I find is that I get a lot of people that come to me and they say, Matt, I'm really struggling to get people to follow me. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing? And they're like, well, I'm spamming people on LinkedIn. I'm going on all these podcasts. I'm, going to all these networking events, and everybody that comes to me only seems to care about price. So I feel like I'm in this constant hamster wheel of struggling to find interested people, trying to set myself apart, trying to make the sale, feeling like all they care about is price. And I'm like, okay, well, let me ask you a question, because I personally believe that if you can't articulate the value of what you provide when somebody's politely listening in a networking room, what chance do you have online when people give you fractions of a second? So let me ask you what it is that you do, imagining that I just met you and maybe you're a successful networker in your way, where you actually were interested before you tried to be interesting. And then I said, oh my gosh, Anna, I've been talking to you for 20 minutes. I haven't even asked you what it is that you do. What would you say? And it's always, oh, that's where I get stuck. Or I get this response with, oh, well, I'm an accountant and, I specialize in helping people with complex problems understand their numbers. And I'm like, so it's an I. It's all about you, firstly, which is horrific. But then secondly, I'm an accountant for everybody. Right? So it's like, I have no passion for helping any specific group. If you give me money, I'm going to go and be able to buy a new car. So I'm willing to work with you. No problem. That's not what people want to hear. It's not exactly inspiring, and it's not separating you. It doesn't make you a specialist. So I'm like, okay, you're an accountant and you're nothing special. That's kind of this, even milk companies, right? When I go to the milk aisle, milk's milk. Yet I go there and there are 26 varieties and they all have a reason for buying them. But when I'm trying to get an accountant, more often than not, they're just an accountant, or they're just a copywriter, or they're just a ghostwriter. And it's like, are you kidding me? How do you possibly sum up a unique amount of experience, past background, these amazing qualities, the education that you've got? How do you qualify that as I'm an accountant? That's like me or anyone in the listenership reading my book, The Introvert's Edge, and saying, I'm an introvert's edge specialist. No, you're a lifetime of experience. So what you have to do is say, what's different? What's unique about me? And more importantly, how do I articulate that in a way that excites and inspires people to want to know more? And that takes homework. Now, this, by the way, this is the smallest amount of homework. This doesn't take anywhere near as long as you think. And yet nobody does it. And they spend hours, days trying to build out their entire digital marketing plan. Yet nobody separate. There's nothing different from them. So they're just spending more money on ads, hoping that they'll get a better result, which is the definition of insanity. So one of the things that I always suggest to people is come back and think about your messaging. And a great example of that would be, Wendy. She was a language coach. If you want to talk about something vanilla, she talked about she educated people on how to learn the Mandarin language, kids and adults, and she charged $50 to $80 an hour, which was actually a pretty good business for her for a while. She charged $50 to $80 an hour for like a decade. The problem is we're now living in this more global world. There were people moving into California, which is where she had her business, willing to charge $30 to $40 an hour. She had people in China that were offering to do it on Craigslist for $12 an hour. And thanks to our friends in Silicon Valley, they'd created technology. I'll teach you Mandarin, you teach me English, we just won't charge anyone anything. So she's competing against free. So she comes to me and she says, Matt, can you teach me some sales techniques in order to close more deals? That's like saying, hey, can you give me an email campaign that'll get people to forget that they can get the service for free? Instead, they need to pay me $80 an hour. Or I need to create the perfect webinar or the perfect ad. That's not going to work. So sure, you can get better results, but you need to look at how to avoid that battle altogether. And that's what I said to her. So I looked at all of her clients. She worked with hundreds over the years. And what I realized is that there were 2 clients that she helped with far more than just Mandarin education. Just 2, but these were executives being relocated across to China. And I started to look at these people and I was blown away with what she did. I mean, the first thing she helped them understand was the difference of rapport in China and the Western world. Like in the Western world, if I'm trying to sell you something, I might say at the end of a 30-minute conversation, if I'm really bad at sales, hey, you want to move forward? And you'll say yes, no, or everyone's favorite. Let me think about it, right? Which is in the digital marketing world, when we're not having a two-way dialogue, it's I'm now going to forget it. You try and send me as many follow-up emails as you want. Good luck. A week from now, if I reach out and check in with you and you still say you want to think about it, I know I'm not getting that sale. In China, though, they're going to want to meet with you 5 or 6 times before they even discuss business. They're probably going to want to see you drunk over karaoke once or twice. It's just who they are. It's the character of who they are because they're talking about 24, 50, 100-year deals, not transactional contracts like we do here. So they want to know the character of the person they're doing business with. She helped them understand the difference between e-commerce in China and the Western world, the importance of respect, why you can't just learn the language, you've got to reduce your accent, how to handle a business card, and why it matters so much. I'm like, Wendy, stop. You're doing so much more for these people than just language tuition. What are you doing? She's like, well, they're just a few things. I'm just trying to help. Now, by the way, when you're trying to sell online, digital coaching or digital anything that you do, or you're having a conversation with someone, 99.99% of the time, you are going to offer them things that they did not realize you were going to offer them, that they so appreciate. That's why they offer you referrals because of this. But we don't mention it when we're selling. So I said, you're stuck in your functional skill. Is it fair to assume as a result of the assistance that you're giving these people, they're going to be more successful when they get to China? And she's like, well, yeah, I mean, that's the point, right? I'm like, great, let's call you the China success coach then. Now, let's have a look at the next point, which is for her, who am I going to sell this to, right? She's like, who's going to buy it? What she's asking is, who do I go networking looking for? And I said, well, let me ask you. I said, who do you think your ideal client is? And she's like, well, I mean, it's obviously executives. Well, that's about as broad as you get. And I'm like, secondly, yes, I mean, I was terrified moving from Australia to the United States. I mean, and they speak the same language. Imagine going to China or Poland, right? It'd be terrifying for me. Imagine them. So, but I just don't think it's your ideal client because, it's just like, well, hang on a second. I know what you're saying, but I think the companies then would probably be the ideal demographic because they're the ones with the money. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, a lot of times they've got millions of dollars riding on their executive being successful. I still don't think it's your ideal client. Frustrated, she's like, well, who then? I'm like, well, personally, I think it's the immigration attorney. And she's like, what? I said, think about this for a second. These people make $5,000 to $7,000 for doing the visa, handling all the bureaucracy that comes with that. They've got to get the customer, which we all know isn't free anymore. They've got to, handle staff. They've got office space. They'd be lucky to make $3,000. I said, so why not just offer them $3,000 for a successful introduction? So she started to go to networking events and share a passion for supporting executives being relocated to China. She shared with them that she'd offer them $3,000 for a successful introduction. They're like, that's double my profit. I mean, what have I got to say? She said, all you got to do is say, congratulations, you've now got your visa. I just want to double check you're as ready as possible to go to China. Now, they were constantly responded with, yeah, I think I'm fine. We got our, visa now. Thank you. We've got our place sorted. We're learning the language. Kids are pretty good at it too. I think we're set. And they just respond with, there's a lot more to it than that. I think you need to speak to the China success coach. When you then get on the phone with the easiest sale in the world, these people were terrified to go. The company was motivated to pay and they were recommended by their attorney. Now, she charged $30,000 for this. Minus a $3,000 commission, she made $27,000 for the easiest sale in the world instead of struggling every day to charge $50 to $80 an hour in a crowded marketplace. That's the power of saying, what are the things I do outside the scope of my functional skill? For Wendy, it was language consulting, but it was a functional skill, but it was the understanding of the rapport relationship, how to respect people and e-commerce that made her the China success coach. When I look at myself, I'm a branding expert, I'm a sales and marketing strategist, I'm a master in neuro-linguistic programming. Truthfully, I'm too many things, nobody cares. They don't care how hard it was for me to learn these things or how long it took me to learn them. By the way, nobody cares about how long it took you either. But when I say I'm the rapid growth guy, the simplicity of that gets me heard in a marketplace, in a crowded marketplace. When I then say I specialize with helping introverted service providers, that then makes me the only logical choice for somebody in that group. And when I go to a networking event and somebody asks me what I do, I respond with, I'm the rapid growth guy. Their brain explodes because they're like, I don't have a bucket to put that in. What is that? And I then respond with, one of the things I love to see more than anything in the world is an amazing introverted service provider with enough talent, skill, and belief in themselves to go and start their own business. But what I find, I just hate seeing this, is more often than not, they get stuck in this endless hamster wheel of struggling to find interested people, trying to set themselves apart, trying to make the sale, feeling like people only care about one thing, price. Do you know anyone like that? Well, of course they do. And now we're having this dialogue about how they're struggling or how they know someone that's struggling. And I've seen only about caring about people, which is why when I go into explaining that my mission is to help these people realize there are 3 things outside the scope of their functional skill that help them obtain the rapid growth business that they love, all of a sudden they're all ears. Now, when I take that messaging and move it to an online forum, that has explosive growth opportunity. But if I said, hey, I'm a sales trainer, good luck. My ideal audience of introverts would be like, sales doesn't work for me. They wouldn't give me a second thought. Yet, instead, I become the only logical choice. So does Wendy, and so will you if you stop trying to be safe and be who you were always meant to be. And that's the hardest thing for introverts, is to be brave enough to realize it's the what's not vanilla about you that actually makes you the only logical choice, not to everyone, but to a group. And with the power of digital marketing and the technology that GetResponse and other platforms offer, it allows you to leverage it in a way that was just unheard of 20 years ago and allows you to make the money you deserve.
For sure, like this ability to differentiate yourself and actually to just, analyze your strengths and putting it in the right words. It's a bit of a challenge for like most businesses and most people that are out there. But as you said, if you spend some time analyzing that, you can definitely figure out a way to just be visible, become visible suddenly.
Well, I'll push back on that because it needs to be pushed back on. When I ask somebody how long they spent learning to be an accountant, the answer I get is years. When I ask someone like yourself how long it took you to become a master at digital marketing, the answer becomes, well, it's an ever focus for me because everything's always changing. When I ask you how long you spent focusing on your messaging, the answer is, well, I thought about it in the car the other day and I just haven't managed to get the greatest response. What's interesting is I did this, I spoke at the National Freelance Conference. It was a couple of years ago now, just prior to COVID. And I've got this 5-step template that I created to help people create their unified message and discover their niche. Oh, by the way, everyone listening, you don't need to hire me to get access to that. You can get it at matthewpollard.com/growth. Now, the reason why I go through this template with people is because I want people to realize how easy it is, right? So what I did is at the end of the session, I said, who here now feels that they now have a unified message, their version of the China Success Coach, the rapid growth guy, that will excite and inspire people to want to know more. And they've also identified a niche of people that are willing to pay them what they're worth. Now, 97% of the room put their hands up. Now, the next question makes this not sound as good as that, which is I said, now, okay, I'm really glad to hear that, but do me a favor, just keep your hands up if this is the most time you've actively spent working on your marketing. Now, hear my words, actively spending working on your marketing, i.e. not reading another book and another book. Introverts, it's what I call busy procrastination. We read 100 books on marketing, but we apply nothing, right? Or we buy a bunch of programs because apparently having them on our hard drive or available online all of a sudden makes our business successful, right? What I said is actively applying, like doing the work. And about 85% of the room kept their hands up. The whole session was 90 minutes long. Yet, I mean, there was a florist that doubled her business within the space of 60 days because of that seminar. Now, she can't exactly leverage digital marketing like an online coach can, right? It depends on, how far she can send the flowers. So it is possible. When I speak at corporations a lot of the time, I do what's called a story transformation from stage, where somebody gets up and, usually it's this big, excited extrovert that wants to share this story of how they owned this client and got them a great result. And then at the end, I'll ask a few questions and then I'll tell them the story back in a way that's much more emotionally driven, that helps people see the power and the care behind what they do. And the whole transformation maybe takes 8 to 9 minutes. And people are blown away at how quickly this stuff can happen. So when somebody says to me, well, it's a big process, it's hard, I'm like, well, how much time have you actually spent doing this? Not in the car listening to podcasts that you should do this, reading books on how to do this, but actually sitting down with a piece of paper, maybe the 5-step template that I mentioned, and actually sitting down and doing the work. And the answer is often very, very few people have. And I'm like, well, then how could you possibly know? Like, you've spent this entire lifetime learning your functional skill. You're willing to sit down and write a 12-part email sequence, do this really bad webinar that speaks to nobody with a vanilla message. You do all of this work, but you're not willing to sit down for a few hours just to, and when I say this, a few hours, not days, not months, a few hours, because it feels, especially in our instant gratification society these days, standing still, even writing emails sometimes feels like you're not moving forward. Imagine sitting down and working out your strategy. For a lot of people, that's stressful. It creates anxiety energy. But if you sit down for just a few hours, you can work this out. Like when we were talking about goals, I often ask people what their goals are, and they're still articulating them as like the thing they inherited from their family member. I'm like, if you don't know where you're going, how can you expect to succeed? Like I've created a multi-million-dollar business that I couldn't stand. I can tell you there's one thing worse than not getting rapid growth. It's having a rapid growth business with customers you don't like and a business you can't stand. So if you don't have these strong goals, what's the point? Yet so many people, if I was to say, well, when did you last sit down to do these? And, I'll direct them. I've got a podcast called The Better Business Coach. Episode 17 is called Forget About Goals. Why is the key to success? Most people have such superficial goals that won't make them happy even if they achieve them. And I'll say to them, when did you last sit down to work out your messaging? When did you last sit down to work out your goals? And the answer is, oh, well, I tried to sit down, but then my son walked into the room or my phone rang. We live in this world of what is really important to me in life? Or what should my messaging be? Oh, what's that notification? What's that thing that just came through? We don't spend the time doing this. And because we don't spend the time doing this, we then blame the technology that the email system must not be working, or that sequence that I was given that had 80% of everything written for me. All I had to do was put my uniqueness into it. Did not perform the way they promised. And the answer was that you toned it down to this vanilla thing that, yes, the occasional person will buy. I mean, Zig Ziglar used to say, if you put a business card on a dog and put the dog into town, eventually somebody will get that card and go, that's interesting, and hire you. But that's not exactly what we want to do if we're spending time going out networking, if we're spending time writing email campaigns, putting together webinars, spending money on digital ads. That is a ticket to going broke, and that is why so many businesses fail. So introvert, extrovert, regardless, you've got to get your messaging right, because even extroverts struggle with selling themselves, because how do you not take rejection personally? But how can you possibly be okay with getting so much rejection and having so few people respond to your webinars and your emails when you've spent no time learning how to communicate what amazing things that you do that no one else does, and targeting the people that you do that for? Because most people just don't even know the answers to those questions, yet they don't understand why they failed in business.
I really like this concept of active procrastination, right? So like when you actually, listen to several podcast episodes, maybe like read a book and complete a course, but still you actually get familiar with a certain topic, but you don't give yourself a chance actually to start doing it and developing the skill. So for sure, this is guilty as charged here. So
well, I appreciate you letting me push back on you, because I will tell you there are a few things that I do in every interview, because it's important to do so. One is that we have, I talk about story a lot, and I talk about the science behind story. And while story is an amazing thing to learn in the sales process, because, we learned that it, especially for introverts, it activates the reticular activating system of our brain, which actually creates artificial rapport. Now, for introverts, we struggle with that initial rapport. We're really great at fostering deep rapport. So if we can get into a story, that fosters that initial rapport that we can then turn into deep rapport. Powerful. But the other thing you learn in the science of story is when you tell a story, it short circuits the logical mind and you speak directly to the emotional mind. So the logical part of the brain is like, that won't work for me. I'm not sure if that applies to me. I don't have time for this. Close the email, hang up the phone. When the emotional part of the brain hears a story, it short circuits the logical brain and goes, story time. And it just listens. It assumes all the detail in the story is fact, and it just listens to the moral of the story. And if the moral of the story is, I worked with someone just like you and we got an amazing result, bang, they're going to want to work with you. but it also helps me help other people understand the dangers of story. If you're telling yourself these stories about why it's harder for you, or how it's just impossible for my industry to create a unified message, or it probably won't work for me. You're telling yourself these stories. Your logical brain will tell you it's not true. Like, your logical brain will tell you science says that introverts actually are at the best of their game in sales and networking and public speaking, at being podcast guests, being a podcast host, because they ask informed questions, right? But you tell yourself these amazing stories that short circuits all of that, and then we go, story time. Let's listen to how horrible it is for me and how hard it is for me and how it's going to be impossible. So we get in our own way. So one of the biggest things that I do on podcasts is I call out amazing podcast hosts that have shared with me that they're introverted, because a lot of people will see someone like me and go, wow, he's really articulate. He speaks way too quick. There's no way he's an introvert. Yet I am. So how is that possible? Planning, preparation. While a lot of what I have said, I've customized to the questions that you've asked. We had an hour of preparation before this call, so I knew what I was coming into. On top of that, I have spent a lifetime refining how I articulate this message to be dynamic here. So whenever you hear a podcast host who sounds like they just have these dynamic conversations, you have no idea how many hours went into it before then. Whenever you see someone go up on stage, like, I go up on stage and I'll speak from stage, and people will put their hand up and they say, I know you said you're introverted, but you're not introverted anymore, right? And I'm like, that's not something you can change, right? If you draw your energy from being by yourself, and psychologists have made it way too confusing. If you draw your energy from being by yourself, you're an introvert. If you draw your energy from being with people, you're an extrovert. Now, sure, some might say, well, sometimes I really enjoy networking. So do I. That doesn't make me an extrovert. I'm still tired afterwards. Now, I'm less tired because I've planned, I've prepared, I've researched who's going. So I go to a networking event like it's a bunch of pre-planned conversations. I'm not guessing. I'm not walking in going, oh gosh, I hope somebody likes me, and then ending up talking to someone that sells insurance. I'm going in planned and prepared. So it takes less mental focus, less anxiety, less stress. And I love networking. I love sales. And funnily enough, I had this client, Avery Thatcher, who literally told me, I'm not doing sales calls at all. I'm going to put emails to webinars. I know you say that's what you do. I need to skip that process if I'm going to work with you. And I said, no, I'm not doing that. I said, what I will do is make a deal that you can do 20 sales calls to find out exactly what people will say. And to do that, to do it well, you've got to learn the process. So you've got to plan and prepare to get the script right, to know what stories to tell, what order to say things. I always say to people, like, the sales process is simple. Like, if you grab the 7-step process, which, by the way, you can download the sales process in the first chapter of my book at theintrovertsedge.com. You don't need to buy my book for that. And I literally map out the 7 steps. And if you grab what you currently say and put it into that, you'll realize some things don't fit. Throw that out. You shouldn't be saying that to customers. You'll realize there's some things out of order, which, by the way, is why you end up talking about price way too soon. You'll realize there's some gaping holes, which is also why you end up fighting on price all the time. Once you fix that, you'll double your sales in the next 60 days. So what we did is I said, go and do 20 sales calls. She loves sales now. She still has a webinar, but she won't give up selling. She's like, that's how I keep the pulse with my customers. That's how I stay relevant. I still need to be talking to people because it allows me to evolve my webinar. It allows me to work out, like, the people that don't buy, why wouldn't I do a sales call with them to work out why they didn't buy? And if I can convince them to buy, how do I build that into a follow-up webinar? The willingness to want to sell is something that you can't avoid. The problem is that, yes, we avoid it like the plague because we believe that we can't. And that is why I'm constantly saying to people that you can't tell yourself these stories. You can't get in your own way. Introversion is not a disadvantage. It's an advantage, right? You're not a second-class citizen. Your path to success is just different. And truthfully, for everyone listening, introvert and extrovert alike, because there may be some extroverts here that have forgiven the fact that most of this segment's about introversion because they've got a husband, a wife, a son, a daughter, a staff member that is introverted, and they want to learn how to work with those people more effectively, right? What you've got to understand is that if you're an extrovert listening to this is probably going to be the most powerful piece of content you're going to get, which is this. If you are reading 100 books but applying none, then stop reading books. Apply one of the ones you've already read. If you've listened to 100 podcast interviews but not found a single mentor to go deeper to read their book, you're making a mistake. Turning through more information is not the ticket for success, right? When I started in digital marketing, and I told you about this before, in our previous conversation, right? I was responsible for 5 multi-million-dollar success stories by myself before I turned 30. Yet I thought the whole online world was a little bit of a scam, right? I thought that, the people that were in PR, they could never talk about results because they didn't really have any. I thought that SEO was just a way that I could blow money, right? For me, a website was enough to put up online to prove to people that I was going to be around tomorrow. It was safe to give a check, right? That's the way that I saw online. And I'm embarrassed now that I thought that, but my entire identity was forged around the fact that I was an introvert that learned how to sell. I was proud of that. And because of that, I told myself this story that got in my way of growing. I mean, today I make amazing money, far more than, for the activity than we used to do. I used to have 50 staff, a whole bunch of telemarketers trying to churn data. Today, people chase me. They email me all the time saying, hey, Matt, can I work with you? They buy my online programs. It's all automated. I hid away from all of that because I told myself this story. Once I stopped telling myself this story, which only happened when I moved to the United States, and I went, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to go home if I have 50 staff here. I'm always going to have to be here. So I went, I'm going to learn online. And I did it I listened to 100 and something podcast interviews. I picked 3 people. I read their books. I scoured their blog posts. I sent them emails saying, hey, I checked these 2 blog posts and this one contradicts this one. And I get responses back from the influencer going, go with that one, but this one gets more SEO, so I can't pull it down. I learned all of it, but I went consuming, application, and then got my hands dirty. If you don't spend time getting your hands dirty, then you're failing. Like the amount of people that read my book and they reach out to me to say thank you. And they're like, Matt, thank you so much for writing your book. It's changed my life. I'm like, oh, great. How's your sales system working? Well, I haven't really built a sales system like you said yet. Okay. Well, which stories are you telling with customers now? Well, I haven't really built stories the way you said yet. Well, how has it changed your life? And just knowing I can sell as an introvert has changed my life. And I'm like, well, that's pointless. Knowing you can sell, but then not being able to sell is a waste of everyone's time. That's like paying for GetResponse and not using it. What's the point, right? What you need to do is consume information, believe that you can, take responsibility for doing that, time block out time. And by the way, if your goals aren't strong enough to say this is important, you're going to find excuses and you're going to tell yourself stories. So decide that you're going to do it, block out time to do it, and actually do application and tell yourself, I don't care if my best customer calls me. If I was in a meeting to sell to someone, I wouldn't answer my phone. So why would it be any different when I'm blocking out time to create the content that I need or the messaging that I need to get somebody to call me? Block out time and do the work. And it does, again, not take as much time as you think. Yes, I spent 6 weeks. It was a horrific 6 weeks learning how to sell, but I went from terrified to being the best in the business. And I've carried that success, by the way, my entire life. So even if I did it over 6 years, it wouldn't be a bad thing. But if you spent 6 hours, you'd be miles further ahead than you are now. And I'm sure that you say this all the time to your customers at GetResponse, right? If you spend a few hours just getting your messaging right, everything else would work better. Oh, if you spend a few hours applying the trainings that we teach and you provide a ton of content for your readership and your listenership, right? If you just spend time applying the information we give you, then you'd have much better results. Yet people don't, because they believe that they're moving forward by consuming information. No, you only move forward when you consume and then apply. And for that, you have to get out of your own way. And introverts, gosh, we get in our own way when it comes to rapid growth. We tell ourselves stories and we just keep stopping taking action, because even with sales, right, I say breakout time, plan sales. And the next thing I hear, they picked up 2 books on sales and they're trying to put the 2 systems together. Like sales is mixed martial arts, right? Pick one system, one process and apply it. And don't try and learn multiple things at once. Pick one thing, one system, apply that. Then look at whether or not you want to improve that process by bolting on other people's ideas or adding on the next element. That's the key to rapid growth.
I love it. Thank you so much. I think this is like a great way to end it because it was so motivational, and I really like ending those pieces on, when people feel like doing something. I know that I feel like getting up. I was just thinking about it. I have bought around 15 books over the course of past 2 months, and they're just sitting on the shelf. They're not marketing books. They're just books. And it's a shame. Like the shelf is right in front of my bed, so it's staring me into the soul every morning. So now I'm feeling really motivated to actually read them.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. And, one of the things I love, you guys are both introverted. We've talked about this in detail. And I was actually saying in Poland, where you are, it's one of the most introverted countries in the world. And I will say that one of the things that you've both shown today is you've planned and prepared, which has allowed you to ask more detailed questions, which has actually allowed me to give better responses, where a lot of times people will ask me surface level questions. So I give them the same answers that I've done on 100 other podcasts. but also your honesty about the fact that you've got books sitting, on your bookshelf, the honesty about the fact that, it's just harder for us, and then being open to receiving information, that is, and the fact that you're going to reflect on it, which, by the way, reflection as an introvert is either an incredibly negative behavior if we're beating ourselves up, or incredibly positive if we're looking at sales as a system or networking or digital marketing and looking for improvement opportunities. So what you've shown is the strengths of an introvert in this interview. And so for those people that feel like introverts don't have an advantage, go back and stop listening to me in this interview and listen to the two hosts that you've heard from, and realize that what they're doing is reflecting and reacting to this conversation, which, if you constantly feel like you have the answers, if you constantly feel like you have something to say, which, I mean, my job as the guest is to do that, right? But I spend more of my time listening than speaking when I'm having normal conversations. And the reason for that is that's how introverts grow. It's also what our customers, our prospects, and what we need to do to succeed in digital marketing. Because if we're not listening, how are we understanding what they say to use their words in what we write in our email campaigns and our webinars?
I think this is great, best advice you could give it. So thank you so much for an information-packed episode. I mean, there's just so many new facts that I'm thinking about. I'm thinking about buying your book as well. Maybe it will end up on the shelf of shame, but maybe I'll actually read it.
Well, terrific. Well, thank you so much for having me on.
And that's the end of today's episode. We hope you enjoyed it and learned quite a few things about extroverts and introverts and their power in today's world.
I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you learned something new about your colleagues or about yourself. Do let us know by sending us an email at podcast@getresponse.com or by replying through Spotify. And don't forget that you can find Operation Automation at Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Anchor, or wherever you get your podcasts. And stay tuned for more. Operation Automation is out. Operation Automation is backed up by GetResponse, the marketing automation platform that's been on the market for over 20 years. Subscribe for more juicy insights. And remember, automate, don't complicate.